All right, let's talk Dallas Cowboys. I'm Nick, and this is our daily Cowboys show. The Dallas Cowboys wrapped up their first training camp practice of the season yesterday. A lot of juicy stuff to talk about today, including officially the Cowboys have a new starter at a key position. I think we all saw this coming, but it's great to finally get confirmation on the practice field. We'll talk about that, plus so much more. But first, let's get things going with how we do it every single day on this show, and that's with a little stat of the day, a little palate cleanser, if you will. And I want to pull up this post courtesy of NFL Researcher on X, and shout out to my man Omar in on X, who shared this and highlighted it to me so that way I could point it out here on the show. I'm assuming that's why you shared it with me, Omar, because it's a really interesting stat. And what he noted here is offensive 3-and-out punt rate in 2025, the best team, the Dallas Cowboys, 13.0%. Pretty big gap, by the way, between the Cowboys and number 2, the Panthers at 15.2, then the 49ers at 15.3, Rams at 15.5, and the Falcons at 16.4. So you can look at the numbers here, and it becomes pretty clear how good the Cowboys were at avoiding 3-and-outs. There was a 2.2% difference between Dallas and number 2. There was only a 1.2 difference between Carolina, number 2, and Atlanta, number 5. So Dallas kind of lapping the field there a little bit. But I think the part that's really interesting to me, look down at the bottom teams. You can see the Steelers, Broncos, Titans, Browns, and Eagles. Now, obviously, the Titans and Browns were quite awful last year, but the Eagles won the division. The Broncos went to the AFC Championship game, should have won it if Bo Nix doesn't get hurt. And the Pittsburgh Steelers won their division as well. And if my main takeaway here is that you can overcome really, really mediocre offense. We saw it with Philly last year. You can overcome mediocre defense. You can't overcome disaster. You can't overcome catastrophe, which is what the Cowboys were defensively last year. Now, that's logical. That's obvious. There's nothing earth-shattering about that. But that's really important because a lot of people will be hyper-focused on trying to improve one player or one position group or sometimes even one side of the football. You have to have balance everywhere. You can't have any major weakness. One of the reasons I believe the New England Patriots and Kansas City Chiefs after them created dynasties so successfully was not just quarterback play. It's because they built teams without clear and obvious weaknesses. There was no great attack vector for those Belichick Patriots teams. There's not a great attack vector for those Andy Reid Chiefs teams. They're not great everywhere, but they're not terrible anywhere. And that's really important. And I think that's something to really hang our hat on as we work our way through training camp, especially considering the entire defensive revolution we're all witnessing. And on that note, let's pull up this report courtesy of Joseph Hoyt from training camp, first day of practice in the books, just in helmets. Now, let me be very clear. An NFL practice just in helmets without pads is 99% more physical, not quite double, not quite 100%, but pretty darn close to a regular high school practice in full pads. This is hyper competitive. This is very physical. There is contact, even though there are no pads. The reason that it is such a way in terms of the physicality is because the CBA, the collective bargaining agreement, all the rules in place limit the amount of padded practices. But the players and coaches treat it as basically as live as you can be without having pads on. So there's a lot of physicality going on here. So keep that in mind as you get training camp updates. And Joseph Hoyt had this post that I think was pretty interesting. He said, in the last 3 plays, I've seen Cowboys rookie Caleb Downs line up near the edge in the box and play deep middle third, talking about deep middle third safety, like that center fielder kind of role. They wanted a versatile defensive back, and they plan to use Caleb Downs accordingly. So Downs is officially their playmaker. He is going to be their versatile guy. That has been clearly established. In fact, if I go into this next report real quick, just to jump ahead, Joe Hoyt also noted the starting secondary on the first play of team defense. Now, this is not obviously set in stone. Things can change, of course, but this tells me Christian Parker's plan for the Cowboys secondary, and this is sort of his starting vector. This is what he wants to go with. Kobe Durant on the outside, Deron Bland on the other outside, Malik Hooker and Jalen Thompson at safety, and then Caleb Downs as the nickelback. So there we go. Caleb Downs is the starter. And also really important to understand, the Cowboys are going to play in sub-package nickel defense as their standard personnel in terms of their most usage. A lot of people were questioning, 3-4 defense. What is that going to mean personnel-wise? The reality is in today's NFL, and we talked about this at the time, but I think this is just all of that coming to bear, the Dallas Cowboys, like most teams, are going to spend the vast majority of their time in nickel structure, in at least 5 defensive back structures. So when you hear 3-4 and 3, the old Bill Parcells 3-4, Wade Phillips with 3 defensive linemen, 2 outside linebackers, 2 inside linebackers, not going to see a whole lot of that for the Dallas Cowboys. In some situations you will, But the reality is they're going to live in nickel primarily, which means Caleb Downs is going to be on the field a lot. And I think that's really good. And the Cowboys are already getting him used to those situations as I switch back to this report right here. Again, lining up near the edge, that's sort of that traditional nickelback slot defender, jumping into the box to support in the run as needed, and also rotating the middle third to be a deep safety. That's really important because the Cowboys under Christian Parker, I think a big part of their defense, and this is one of the reasons I love Vic Fangio and everyone that comes from his trees, they're all about disguises. They make life very complicated for the quarterback on the opposing side. Now, it's not like incredibly complicated in terms of revolutionary defensive schemes, but they just throw a bunch of stuff at quarterbacks. They do a lot of different rotations. They're not crazy with exotic blitzes or anything like that, and they actually almost never blitz. They use a different tact. What they do, instead of using blitzing to create chaos, they use rotations and disguises to create chaos. And the theory, I think, is just as important because there are quarterbacks that you could blitz, but if you speed up the process, that actually helps them out because they don't think about it. They, oh, blitz coming, hit the hot read, right? A lot of quarterbacks, Dak Prescott is one of them, to be totally honest, are very good in those situations. Vic Fangio says, I want my quarterbacks that I'm playing against to be uncomfortable. I don't want them to feel a blitz coming and feel, oh, I know where to go with the hot read. So what do? You disguise your coverages. So the quarterback may only be dealing with 4 rushers, may only be dealing with 3 rushers. But he looks around, okay, primary read. Oh, shoot, I thought it was cover 2. It's actually cover 3. Let me go to the other side with my cover 3 beaters. Oh, my goodness, I was wrong. It's actually a different coverage. Caleb Downs is now in that throwing lane. I thought he was going to be somewhere else. And now you're like, what am I seeing? What am I doing? Look, you're looking around, and then bang, you get killed by Quinnen Williams. That is the goal. That is the idea. And so far, they're using Caleb Downs as the versatile playmaker, or certainly one of them. Lost in this conversation, I think, is the value of Jalen Thompson, because if Downs is rotating deep middle third on some snaps, that means Jalen Thompson is likely rotating closer to the line of scrimmage. That's one of the reasons why I think the Thompson signing, while it was a good move at the time, I think it's going to be more important than people realize, because he's going to give the Cowboys, again, flexibility, the ability to rotate, the ability to do a lot of different things from a secondary perspective. I think the Cowboys safety room, Thompson, Malik Hooker, Downs, PJ Locke, although PJ Locke unfortunately got hurt at the time of this recording at 5 in the morning my time. Don't have any updates on how serious PJ Locke's injury is. Doesn't appear to be too serious, but time will tell on that front. His training camp is just the way it is. We all hate it, of course. Injuries are just part of the game. But based on this entire cadre of safeties on this Cowboys roster, there's going to be a lot of rotations. There's going to be a lot of disguises. There's going to be a lot of confusion for the opposing offense. And if you go back and look at the Cowboys defense in 2025, one of the things that really stands out to me, aside from the communication bus that created wide open players down the field against Dallas all season long, one of the things that really stood out to me is that how comfortable quarterbacks were most of the time. The only time they weren't comfortable is if Clowney or Ezraku or Quinnen Williams or somebody just won right off the rip and made a great play. But from a structural perspective, opposing quarterbacks just knew where they were going to go all the time. Even if the Cowboys got a lot of pressure, they knew where to go with the football for big plays. Even if the Cowboys didn't have coverage busts, they knew exactly where to go with the football to stay ahead of the chains. They were terrible at disguising. They just kind of lined up and played. Now, at a basic level, that's not a terrible idea, but that only truly works if you have elite talent and you're a really good tactician, like you know how to mix it up. Eberflus did not have elite talent last year and didn't have the really good tactics. Christian Parker, we'll have to see what he does with a much, I'll say, greater talent level this year. And we don't know about his tactics. I expect him to be good, but time will tell, of course. He's got to validate that with the Cowboys. But the disguise element has already arrived, creating some uncertainty, making life hard for the opposing offense. And Caleb Downs is going to be the key piece to all of that. So everyone's looking at Downs, all eyes on him. And so far, he's already doing a lot of things from a versatility perspective. He's day one starter, which means barring something crazy, he'll be a day one starter this regular season. Day one starter, hopefully going throughout a very successful NFL career. So far, so good for this Cowboys rookie. And again, all the talk of Downs, all the talk of him doing good in mini camps and OTAs and all that kind of stuff, it has now gotten to a point where he's officially a starter for this Cowboys defense. And I think that's important. All right. Let's talk about this here from Patrick Walker, at Voice of the Star. Great follow on X if you're looking for Cowboys news. Quoted Quinnen Williams after practice saying, I definitely want to be here for the long haul. The Cowboys are going to try and make that happen while they're in Oxnard for training camp. Obviously Quinnen Williams out of the Jets organization with the Cowboys organization. Of course, he would say this, right? Most players do, but he's mentioned, similar things, both, publicly and privately based on reporting. When it comes to, he's very happy with Dallas, very excited to be a part of this Cowboys organization. And again, if you look at the Jets, while the Jets have been very dysfunctional, to be totally honest, the New York Jets have, won the same amount of championships as the Dallas Cowboys have had over the past 20 years, over the past 30 years, right? So it's not like the New York Jets, they're not world beaters. Obviously, they're a very bad organization, but it's not like the Cowboys, are winning Super Bowls every other year. But Quinnen Williams says he definitely wants to be here, says he wants to win all of those things. And I think one of the points here, and we've seen a lot of people make this, in fact, Christian Parker did an interview recently kind of hinting at this as well, is that Jerry Jones and the Jones family, the infrastructure and the dollars they invest in the Cowboys facilities, buildings, players in general, is next level. This is something that Jones does not get a lot of credit for. He throws a lot of money to make these players' lives as awesome as possible, right? There's the star complex, there's the things he does for families, there's the great story Patrick Creighton had at former Cowboys wide receiver, talks about when he went to the San Diego Chargers after he left the Dallas Cowboys, and he was looking for some Gatorades to take home to hydrate, and they wouldn't let him take them, right? He had to go to a trainer they were under lock and key. And it's like when I was with the Dallas Cowboys, it was just this huge amount of Gatorade, right? They're a sponsor, right? It's like what it is. You just grab a bunch and take it with you. There are some organizations that are very, I hate to use this term, cheap, but it's true. The Dallas Cowboys are not one of them. And what that does is I think it allows star players from other teams to really appreciate Dallas, to really want to be here for the long term. And this is one of the flaws, I think, with the Cowboys' strategy for so many years from a front office perspective of drafting homegrown guys and then signing them to long-term deals. That was basically all they did. They did not make big splash moves in free agency. And I always thought that was kind of bizarre because the biggest, I would say, sell for the Cowboys is the investment in infrastructure and the facilities and all of that. And yet they kept everybody internal. They didn't bring anybody external, right? And this year we're seeing a little bit different, right? Obviously, it's good to bring in new faces. We're trying to change the culture. Kenny Clark, Rashawn Gary, Jalen Thompson, PJ Locke, D. Winters, Kobe Durant, a bunch of other guys across the board. Quinnen Williams, of course, the trade deadline last year. And a lot of these guys arrive, and I'm sure they're like, man, this is so much better than prior team X or prior team Y. And the Cowboys have not leveraged that incredible strength in so long. A lot of people talk about, Jerry Jones needed to be more aggressive. And I do agree for the most part that is true. And the fact that this offseason was more aggressive was a good thing. But I think the biggest problem with Jerry Jones and the Cowboys front office not using free agency as a really aggressive vector to improve is that their greatest strength, their infrastructure from a franchise perspective, everything built for the players, was never leveraged, right? They would never sign a guy, a star, a big name guy, have him come to the Dallas Cowboys and say, man, this is awesome. And then he could go out and be public or privately talking to other players at the Pro Bowl or whatever and say, listen, Jerry Jones, no expense spared, right? They invest a ton of players. That never happened. You had a lot of Cowboys that basically were drafted by Dallas, extended with Dallas, signed with Dallas, and they never were exposed to anything else. And they just kind of thought, this is the way it is. And a lot of them learned when they went to new franchises, that's not the case. Not the case at all. So I am glad to see the Cowboys, of course, being more aggressive over the past, we'll say 550 days or so at this point to add in quality players outside the organization because they needed to do that to get better. That's obvious. But I think it also is going to allow the Cowboys to finally leverage their biggest strength, which is the incredible infrastructure and support system and investment that Jerry Jones has put in the player facilities. It's one of those things that's not talked about enough, but it is something that I think could really help the Cowboys in bringing in free agents and trades and all kind of players like that in the future. All right. Let's talk about this here from Joseph Hoyt. Brian Schottenheimer on Christian Parker. He's a first-time defensive coordinator who doesn't act like a first-time defensive coordinator. Added that Parker might be the hardest working coach he's been around. One of the reasons you hire young, ambitious, talented coaches is because they understand that they need to step up their game. When you're younger in any field, Christian Parker is younger, obviously, as a defensive coordinator. I think he's the youngest defensive coordinator in Cowboys history, and he's in his mid-30s. He's a year older than I am, just to put a little context on that, right? So he's not exactly a guy that's been in NFL football for decades, far from it. When you have a guy that's young like that, there's a little bit of, they call it imposter syndrome, where it's like, man, do I really deserve to be here? Do I really need to be here? And while that's sometimes viewed as a negative, I think a lot of times it's a positive, because that basically internally, the successful people use that as motivation to work hard and push harder. It's like, man, I'm 34 years old. I'm the defensive coordinator for the Dallas Cowboys. Oh boy, I hope no one finds out that I'm really not that smart. Let me put in the time to make sure that I am going to be a great defensive coordinator. I don't know exactly what's going on in Parker's head, but I imagine it's something like that, just as it would be naturally for anybody of his age and background and resume. I mean, he's been an NFL coach for, I think, 6, 7 years at this point. Far from a guy that's, far from like an Eberflus or a Marinelli or a Nolan or a Quinn or a Zimmer or any of the other prior defensive coordinators. So a little bit of imposter syndrome, right? He's calling plays for a franchise that had Tom Landry called plays on the defensive side for decades, for 29 seasons. So this is probably a little bit of a, I don't want to say a shock to Parker, because he's got a good head on his shoulders and he's got a good background. He's a very smart person. But I do think the fact that, being in this role so young and first-time defensive coordinator, I think that will actually allow him to be motivated to work harder, as Shadi is noting here. And this is, again, goes back to why you hire people that are ambitious, why you hire people that are young and talented and trying to strive. And they don't have to be young necessarily, although younger people tend to naturally be more ambitious. Older people tend to be, in their careers anyway, more like stabilizing. You see this with Eberflus, right? You saw this with Zimmer, right? You saw this with Nolan and Marinelli, right? They're kind of at the end of their careers. Monty Kiffin, go back to him, right? Kind of guys at the end of their careers, a lot of their legacy is set in stone, or at least most of it. They're not trying to create something new. They're not trying to strive out and do great things and build a great career and to build life for themselves and their families. They kind of are happy where they are. I've seen this in my own career, guys. I'm sure a lot of you guys have as well. Work with a lot of guys, in their late 50s. They're, getting close to retirement. Their careers are what their careers are. Their lives are what their lives are. Yeah, they want to do a good job. Yeah, they're working hard, but they're not going to the extreme. They're not pushing the envelope to try and really get the organization at a higher level, because their incentives aren't aligned. They're not going to move on to be the next, S&P 500 CEO if you're 58 years old and you're, a frontline employee still. There's nothing wrong with being that, but that's just reality. Young people, Christian Parker in this case, he has a very bright future in the NFL. He is motivated to the extreme in the way other Cowboys defensive coordinators are not. Right? If you look at, an Eberflus or a Quinn or a Nolan or any of those other guys, their only motivation will be, maybe I get another chance to be a head coach. In the case of Dan Quinn, it did happen, obviously. But if that's the only motivation you have, right, maybe I get a chance to do something again. That's not as good as, I want to climb the mountaintop. I want to build a legacy. Even the best defensive coordinator the Cowboys have had in a long time, Dan Quinn, who I had my beef with, by the way. I thought his greatest one-trick pony in NFL history was not the best strategy for postseason success, but he was obviously a very good defensive coach, phenomenal turnaround artist. Even he already has a legacy kind of set in stone, good and bad. 28-3 collapse in the Super Bowl, but he did coach Seattle Seahawks defense to a lot of success. Right, he already had a legacy pretty well set in stone by the time he arrived with the Dallas Cowboys. Christian Parker's a blank slate, man. His legacy's in front of him. And when you have this opportunity, and an ambitious people like Parker, like Clayton Adams, like the rest of the staff, they will put in the time, they will put in the work. And the reason this is so important, and this is why I want to circle back all the way to Shadi's culture and everything he's trying to implement, we talked about them bringing in players, and Schottenheimer talking about work, putting in the time, working hard, putting in extra time. That only works if you hire people and bring in people at every level of the organization that are going to work hard. If you want to be a culture of people that are grinding, people that are putting in time, people are focused on the process, you can't just say that as a head coach. You have to bring in people that are going to act in that model, act on that path. And it's really hard to tell strictly in an interview, hey man, are you going to work hard here? Who's going to say no? But what you can do is look at a person where they are in their career. Clayton Adams, young, ambitious, talented. He's going to work hard. Christian Parker, young, ambitious, talented. He's going to work hard. Let's hire them. That's what Shadi did here, and I think it's going to go a long way in getting this culture of the Dallas Cowboys completely flipped from where it was a few years ago to where we hope it'll be in short order. All right, let's talk about this here from Patrick Walker at Voice of the Star. Savone Revel, I always get that wrong, drawing early high praise from Cowboys head coach Brian Schottenheimer to begin 2026 training camp. Quote, I am very impressed. Revel is definitely a name to watch. I think to me, this is the most important report over the past 24 to 48 hours from the Dallas Cowboys. Not any Max Crosby rumors or anything like that, or any major trade from Jerry Jones. We talked about that a lot yesterday. Even not really, this is more important to me than the left tackle position battle that came out of nowhere. Drew Shelton getting thrown into the mix as a chance to maybe start at left tackle. Talked about that a lot yesterday. To me, this is the most important thing because Deron Bland is, after this season, is going to have no more guaranteed money left on his deal. It's going to be an interesting position. Talk about maybe even trading Bland. Kobe Durant's on a 1-year deal. So if you look at the two starting outside corners for the Cowboys, both of them are essentially on what could amount to 1-year deals. The secondary at the safety position is pretty more stable with Downs, Thompson. Hooker's on like a 1-year deal as well, but it's sort of a prove-it contract for him. But that position group's more stable. Quarter is not, right? And this is a huge opportunity for Revel. He's the guy that we all know had first-round talent, had the injury, had some ups and downs last season. A lot more downs than ups, if we're being totally honest. A lot more downs than ups. But by all reports, he's had himself a great offseason. There was a great report, I think it was from Walker as well. We're talking about Revel and how much better he feels with his knee. He says he got banged in the knee first day of training camp, and he was fine. He just kept going like it was nothing. After next play, no problem. Whereas last year it may have meant, hey, got to come out of practice for a play, got to come out of the game for a play, something like that. So definitely in a great direction. The fact that Schottenheimer is very impressed, I think, is good. When it comes to Schottenheimer being impressed with players, I think to circle back to what we just talked about with Parker, I think it's a function of how hard they're working, how visible the hard work is, and the results. Now, obviously, we have to see Revel on the practice field. We have to see him do well in training camp, and that's going to be huge for the Cowboys, obviously. But the fact that he's done really good work this offseason, I think is a great sign. I make this point all the time. Good players are good all the time. Hard workers work hard all of the time. Revel has put in the time this offseason. He took his lumps in 2025. He's put in the time. He's significantly better. He's impressed by Shotty's impressed by him. Right, we'll have to see what he does, of course, throughout the days, weeks, and months ahead. But this is a really good start for Savon Revel. He is the key in so many ways to the future of the Cowboys. Because if you look at 2027 and beyond, they're going to have to spend a lot at corner and a lot at tackle, a lot of draft capital there. But if Revel's a good player and could be an anchor at least on one side of the football, then maybe you can re-sign Durant. Maybe maybe Moore can be something, a backup or a quality player out of Florida corner there. Suddenly the picture looks a lot more clear. If Revel can't play, then you have Durant leaving, Bland maybe leaving. You're kind of stuck a little bit. So he's a very important figure when it comes to the present and future of this Cowboys team. All right, let's talk about this here from Nick Harris over at the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. I thought this was kind of interesting. Phil Mafah starting off camp as the second option in running back reps. Jaden Blue also receiving first-team reps. So this is very, very interesting. So you had Javonte Williams. He's obviously the starter. But Jaden Blue got some first-team reps, and Phil Mafah got basically the second string, the backup reps. And this, I think, is in line with what a lot of people were saying, where Jaden Blue is sort of the scat back, the guy who has a unique role. He's not Javonte Williams' backup. He's playing a different position, right? I kind of, if you're looking for a historical analog, it's sort of like Preston Pearson in the 70s with the Dallas Cowboys. Pearson was not Tony Dorsett's backup or was not Newhouse's backup or whoever. That was on the depth chart. That may have been the case, but he was playing a different position all told. That, I think, is Jaden Blue. He's playing a different position. His role is not of running back. His role is third down back or scat back or alternative playmaker, whatever you want to define it. I think it's almost a separate part of the depth chart in a lot of ways. Phil Mafah is actually Javonte Williams' true backup. So that's where the Cowboys are based on one day of practice, which is obviously a small sample size, but that looks like that's where the Cowboys are. Now, it doesn't mean Jaden Blue won't get reps in a traditional running back set. It doesn't mean Phil Mafah may not get reps in like a third down running back set. I think there's going to be some crossover, obviously. But I do think when people look at the running back room, and I know a lot of you guys have hypothesized this, it's not a simple linear depth chart, right? Where it's Williams 1, well, who's going to be the running back 2? Blue or Mafah? Is somebody else going to get in the mix? I think it's a little more complicated than that. I think there's who's going to be the running back 2, Mafah or somebody else, and Jaden Blue is off to the side as a third down back, as an alternative playmaker, a guy who's got a different slate of skills. And I think that's the right approach. We talk about this a lot, positionless players on defense, versatile players on defense. Spent a lot of time today talking about Caleb Downs already. But I think we're not spending enough time talking about positionless players on offense. And Schottenheimer tried that last year, right? He had Turpin line up at running back. He had CeeDee Lamb line up at running back at different times. He's trying to find that guy that can be the positionless player, that he can line up in the slot, line up out wide, send in motion, line up behind running back, line up next to the, or line up behind quarterback in a single back look, line up next to the quarterback in a shotgun look. A guy that can do that and do it well, run the football, block, catch the football. I think he looks at Jaden Blue as that guy, potentially. Now, he's got to earn it during training camp, but what we're seeing so far is that that's the role that's been carved out for him. A dedicated 10 to 15 snaps per game in certain structures and certain play calls. Phil Mafah, I think, is going to be just strictly the backup to Javonte Williams. And I think that's going to be the Cowboys' plan. And I think it's a smart plan because Mafah, stylistically, is very close to Javonte Williams. Jaden Blue, completely different player. Different skill set, different attributes, different strengths, different weaknesses. So this is the Cowboys' plan, at least after one day. And I think it's the right plan, and I think they're going to stick with this. But this is definitely something to watch to see maybe if Jaden Blue gets true second-team reps, maybe Phil Mafah gets some third-down running back reps. I'm sure they'll do some cross-training. But I think it's becoming very clear that Jaden Blue isn't really the backup running back or isn't even really competing to be that. He's in a separate category of positionless playmaker. All right. At this point, we normally do our Forgotten Cowboy of the Day, but I've got a little bit different spin. I want to pull up this quote from John Gruden, just because I saw it online and I wanted to talk about it for a little bit. We've got statistics for defensive linemen these days. How many pressures do you have? How many batted passes do you have? How about how many times did you get your ass kicked? How many times did you get your ass kicked in the running game? That's the kind of statistics we should keep. This is John Gruden doing one of his recent preview episodes for the content he puts out there. And I absolutely love this. You know, and there's a lot of people out there online and in media in general that will talk about, pressures or sacks, batted balls for defensive linemen, right? As if that's the most important thing in the world, as if that's how you grade linemen. And I understand, for so many years, the only stats you had for defensive linemen were tackles, which is really kind of a weird stat for linemen. A lot of really good linemen don't get a lot of tackles, and sacks, which again is a good stat, it's an important thing, but that's not a lot. Right, you look at running backs, rushing yards, touchdowns, yards per carry, receivers, receptions, yards, touchdowns, quarterbacks. There's a million stats. There's a million efficiency metrics. Right, when it comes to defensive linemen, traditionally there wasn't a lot of statistics. Nowadays we have a lot of them. People spend a lot of time talking about the pass rush win rate, pressures, quarterback hits, sacks, of course, batted passes. To me, I like the framing here. How about how many times did you do your job in the running game? Just do that. Get us to 2nd and 9. We'll worry about the pressures and the batted balls later. Get us to 2nd and 9 in the running game. I think a lot of football is becoming that simplified at the NFL level. I know that sounds crazy to think about it that way, but I think it's really true. I cite Mike McDonald a lot for the Seattle Seahawks, and he was interviewed about what was the Seahawks' superpower and why they were so good defensively last year. He said, we can stop the run with 2 deep safeties. Basically, they didn't have to bring a bunch of safeties into the box, right? They had their nickel defender, Nick Amonwori, but they kept their regular 2 safeties deep the vast majority of the time. You could stop the run with light boxes with their defensive tackle play, their defensive line play in general. The Seahawks were not a great pass rushing team. They weren't a bad pass rushing team, but they were not like the Broncos that had a million sacks or anything like that. They were a good but not great pass rushing team at 2025. But they could stop the run, which allowed their secondary to do a lot of disguises, allowed them to keep safeties deep, which mitigated a lot of big plays. So they were able to be multiple on defense, able to make things complex for the opposing quarterback, and they didn't give up any big plays. The result was Super Bowl defense. Now, that may be a slight oversimplification, but the reality is that's not wrong. Big plays and surrendering them can derail any defense. We saw with the Cowboys last year. Stopping the run can elevate any defense, as the Cowboys showed us last year, because they couldn't stop the run consistently. They had moments where they looked good, but I think the issues in the secondary and talent issues at other parts of the roster limited it on a consistency basis. So again, when it comes to the Cowboys front four, if you want to call it that, a 3-4 base, even though they're going to live basically in a 4-2-5 nickel, I think to me, I want to see them stop the run. I know Quinton Williams can get pressures on the quarterback. I know Ezraku did it times last year. Malachi Lawrence is a talented guy. Houston in some situations. Rashawn Gary, I think, has some gas in the tank. Kenny Clark too. But let's stop the run. Let's get to 2nd and 9. Let's get to 2nd and 8. Let's get to 3rd and 5. I'll let the defense disguise. Let's keep our safeties deep. Limit the big plays. Keep everything in front of us. make life complicated for the opposing quarterback, and stop the run. And just do that the entire season. Do that season after season after season. If we do that, guess what? Pressures aren't going to matter. I remember in 2023, frankly, even 2024, and even last year, if we're to be totally honest, Cowboys did well with pressures. Pressures are good. They got, a lot of good stats on pressures. People were excited about them. The Parsons teams were really good at generating pressure. But in those big moments, could they stop the run against good teams? 49ers, Bills, Packers, in the playoffs? Absolutely not. They failed miserably in that endeavor. How many times did you get your ass kicked in the running game? That's the kind of statistics we should keep. If there were those kind of statistics, the Cowboys defense in big moments would have been awful over the past half decade. They made big strides this offseason to correct that problem. We'll see if it works out for them, but to me, that is the most important thing when it comes to the Dallas Cowboys in 2026 and their defensive front. I don't care about sacks. I honestly don't even care about pressures. Stop the run. Let's start there. All right, let's get into the comment section, guys. First comment here is from Jared Goldberg, 4904. He says, LOL, check down Brandon Weeden. That was a good one, Nick. Good grief, the man played with Dez in college, didn't he? Gets to the pros and doesn't throw to him. Yeah, Weeden in 2015 to me was so bizarre. I think he was so, this was a problem, I think, with Brandon Weeden's NFL career, to be honest. He was so terrified of making a mistake that he would, check the ball down, be super conservative, and then be forced to be hyper aggressive, and then inevitably end up throwing an interception or two. And this is why you can't play quarterback like that. You've got to be aggressive where it makes sense to be aggressive, but you can't always just hit the checked out, always hit the safe throw. You got to look for the opportunities to be aggressive, and don't be afraid if you make a mistake. Listen, you're going to learn from it. You're going to come back from it. But I think Brandon Weeden was so to the extreme concerned with turnovers that he would avoid them so much, and by different points in the game would then be forced to be hyper aggressive because the team was trailing, and then he'd be a guy who would turn it over then. So he ended up being like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Not a huge fan of Brandon Weeden, obviously. Did not work out for the Cowboys. Ghetto Cowboy 72 has 2 bites of the apple here. He says, just my personal take on live streams during the games. I mostly don't watch. That's just because I'm so into the game. Yeah, I appreciate the feedback. I posed that question yesterday about whether you guys would like a live stream during the game or not. I'm leaning hardcore against it. But if a bunch of you guys said, hey, I'd really like it, then maybe I'd reconsider. But yeah, I'm into the game. It would be hard for me to live stream with you guys and interact and watch the game at the same time. It'd be a lot going on. But again, we got 1 vote there against it, which is where I'm leaning right now. Shoddy using the media to get his point across to the guys on the team is an overlooked tool sometimes. I believe by the end of camp, Guyton will have left tackle nailed down. He made some leaps in his game last season, but injuries got him. For a player that didn't play left tackle in college, he's doing good. He's still got room to grow, and Dallas knew this when they drafted him. The only reason they drafted him in the first is because he would not have been there in the second. He is a first-round pick, but not a first-round talent at the time. Hashtag PCG, DC for life. Yeah, I think that's fair. I think he was not a guy the way a traditional first-round pick, like Martin or Booker or Frederick or any of those guys in the past were ready to start day one. He was a developmental guy for sure with incredible physical tools, but flaws in his game. But I do think at this point, year 3, it's a big moment for him, right? And the Cowboys, I think, are at a point where they don't want to mess around, right? Listen, we allowed you to develop. We went through the bumps and bruises for 2 years. And while I think he's the heavy favorite, but I think the Cowboys are, I think Shoddy is sending a message to the media. I agree with that. But I think the Cowboys are also being very open to the fact whoever's the best player is going to play. Whoever's going to be the best tackle, whether that's Guyton, whether that's Steele, whether that's Drew Shelton, right? Whoever's going to help us protect Dak Prescott's blind side the best and the most consistently, he's going to play. And whether that's a motivation tactic or whether that's reality, I think it's both, is going to be huge for Guyton. I think he's got to step up. His NFL career is hinging on this training camp and this preseason and this season in general. Now, I do think he'll end up being the starter. But it is interesting that the Cowboys have Drew Shelton in the mix. I talked about this a lot yesterday, of course, because Shelton is a guy who is he's sort of the anti-Guyton. He is not the supreme physical gifts. He's got good physical tools. Of course, he's an NFL player, but not at the level of Guyton. He's more of a guy that you don't see the potential, the classic, really high floor, low ceiling kind of player. So he's a guy that will, I think, over the course of training camp and the preseason will be very stable, will be very consistent. And I think that'll give the Cowboys a good study and contrast between him and Guyton if Guyton doesn't nail down his consistency issues. Now, if Guyton is consistent and healthy, I think he's clearly the runaway top left tackle. But those have been Guyton's 2 biggest problems, being consistent and being healthy. He's got to show he can be both of those things this training camp, this preseason, and this regular season. Silver and Blue Tomcat says, no live broadcast. My full attention is focused on the game and anything else is a distraction. All right. Good vote. Thank you for the feedback and information there. Midwest Cowboy 95 gets into the action. He says, if we're talking about a good burger, I'll take an In-N-Out with some Texas toast from Cane's. Not a lot of In-N-Outs by me, but I have heard good things. When they ask you why you do the SMI Cowboy show, just give them the same exact speech from John Harbaugh with the New York Giants. Just tell them, I'm with the Dallas Cowboys, man. The Dallas Cowboys. I'm talking about the Dallas Cowboys. Yeah, it's a funny speech from Harbaugh. I don't blame Harbaugh for saying things like that because those speeches are always kind of awkward in off-season programs because you're trying to basically, you don't want to it's not like a rah-rah speech, but you don't want to go up there and be very corporate and boring. It's a tough line, right, to kind of toe that. And the fact that the Giants filmed it and put it out publicly is more indicative of poor leadership in the front office side of the New York Giants, where it's like, listen, don't film team meetings, right? They always look bad. There's never a coach that looks great in a team meeting. I have never had a head coach get in front of me in my college experience anyway that looked great in a team meeting, giving a speech, certainly in situations like that. Right, it's either very boring and very droll, or it's just kind of a weird thing because it just is. Right, it's just a weird situation because you're not motivating anybody to go play a game. There's no an opponent that day or that week. Right, you're trying to just get people just sort of excited, but you don't want to get them too excited because it's a long off season. You want to let them know that hey, it's going to be a grind day by day. So it's a tough situation. So Harbaugh acting the way he did, I don't really blame him for that, but I do think it was bad on the Giants for publicly releasing it. We see scheme versus players all the time. When the Cowboys play lesser opponents who still have good coaching and scheme, we tend to drop these trap games even though we are more talented. We can't overcome their coaching. It feels like the whole game we cannot overcome our own bad coaching. We saw this versus the Broncos a few years ago when they were bad and versus the Cardinals. Well, that's a good point. 2021, right? Vic Fangio and Christian Parker came down to Dallas and humiliated Mike McCarthy, Kellen Moore, and the Cowboys offense. That was a masterclass in being outcoached. That's a great point there. Jean-Jacques Taylor is insecure, LOL, or just went clickbait clout. Yeah, we talked about his report yesterday being very critical of Dak Prescott's T-shirt heading to Oxnard for training camp that mentioned Super Bowl 30, the Cowboys' victory over the Pittsburgh Steelers, and he made a big stink about, here we go, Cowboys talking Super Bowl, oh my goodness, how about you win a game or something like that. And it's just, listen, dude, he's wearing a T-shirt celebrating 30 years, 30 calendar years since the Cowboys, won a Super Bowl. What's wrong with that, right? If he didn't wear a T-shirt, if he wore a T-shirt that said something random, people would say, "Oh, he's not being serious. He's not being a leader. He's not being focused on trying to get to a Super Bowl." It's just silly. It's just a reminder, and I know I talked about this yesterday, but the Cowboy hater industrial complex isn't just reserved for people outside the people that follow Dallas. There's a lot of people that are beat reporters, beat writers, or were beat reporters, were beat writers, people that talk Cowboys every day that really hate the Dallas Cowboys. Right, they just do. You can see it. And you guys know who I'm talking about. I'm sure you can remember guys that have post or written certain things like, man, for a guy that follows the Cowboys, you sure hate him. We see a lot of that, and I think that's just a reminder from Taylor's perspective that sometimes the biggest Cowboys haters are really close to the organization, or as the famous movie says, the call is coming from inside the house. All right. This time last year, they traded Micah and traded for Quentin Williams. Later in a splash move a few weeks after. Maybe there will be a trade. I'd say there will be a 15% chance, especially since Bland is a trade target if he's healthy. I don't think there'll be a splash trade. So last year, Micah Parsons was a weird circumstance because it just became I still believe to this day the Cowboys did not want to trade Micah Parsons until he laid on the table in the preseason game and it became enough. Right. I think they were considering offers. And I think the moment they, saw him do that, they're like, we're getting him out of here. I think Schottenheimer would. I don't know for certain, and Schottenheimer never said this. This is just me, getting my read of the situation, and I certainly can't read Schottenheimer's mind. To me, that moment was like, yeah, this guy is antithetical to what we want to build as our team. We cannot have a star player do that. We can't have a star player lay out on the table in a preseason game and disrespect every coach, every player, every fan like that. Can't be allowed to happen. We either suspend him or we trade him. And so they traded him, right? And I think that's what pushed it over the threshold, that moment right there. And unless we see something like that this training camp, this preseason, I don't think we're going to see a massive trade. We could. I'll admit there's a chance. I just don't think it'll happen. Even a Jerron Bland move, to me, that would happen more in season, like at the trade deadline, something like that.
All right, Midwest Cowboy 95, a couple more bites at the apple here. He says, Bears being 32nd to force third downs proves that Al Harris' turnover effect was real. Same we saw with Dallas a few years ago. Nation Wright led the Bears with 5 interceptions. He was far from elite, but this proves how coaching can change a player's relative outcome on a season. Hoping to see some change with Christian Parker as well for our defense. Wright previously had 1 career interception, but you notice Nation Wright no longer with the Chicago Bears. They let him walk. There's a problem I call the Moneyball effect. So Moneyball is obviously based off the book and then later the movie about the Oakland A's in the early 2000s that came up with a creative strategy to win baseball games despite having a much smaller payroll. And it worked to great success. There's one problem, though. It relied on the fact that baseball was played over a long season, 162 games. And if you do certain traits over the course of a long season and admire certain characteristics and bring those guys into your team and support them, over a long season, the law of averages will bend in your favor and you will have success. There's one problem, though. How long are the postseason? How long's the postseason? How long are the playoffs? 5-game series in the divisional round back then for baseball. So that's not a long season, obviously. The law of averages, that's not nearly enough time for it to bear out. Think about it like this. If you flip a coin 500 times, statistically speaking, you guys will observe this in reality, you'll end up with about 250 heads, 250 tails. It's all said and done. But if you flip a coin 5 times, there's a good chance you'll end up with 5 heads or 4. And that's the problem with the Moneyball effect. And that's the problem with relying on turnovers as well. Now, Al Harris is a great coach. I'm not saying he's not. But relying on that specifically, which the Cowboys did for so many seasons, will eventually come to bite you. You saw this in big moments. They forced 0 turnovers against the 49ers in the 2022 divisional round. They forced 1 in 2021. I don't think they forced any in 2023. Did they force any? I think they forced 1 in 2022 in the round against the wild card win against Tampa Bay. So you're talking 2 turnovers forced, if memory serves. I could be wrong there. In 4 playoff games, they were averaging almost 2 per game over the course of those seasons during the regular season. They were averaging 2 over 4, less than basically one every other game. They were down by 25%. Now, had they played enough postseason games, would they eventually have gotten that average up? Probably. But here's the thing: postseason isn't long enough. And I think that's why the Bears moved on from Wright, and that's why the Bears made big changes. Because I do think that relying on turnovers, like the Cowboys did for so many years, is really good over the course of a long season, but it doesn't work in the playoffs. So while I agree with you, I hope Parker provides a lot of value from an interception perspective for this Cowboys defense. I think it's better to rely on traditionally winning on first, second, third, and fourth down than it is to rely on takeaways. Because takeaways, they giveth and then they taketh away. And we saw that a lot during the Dan Quinn era. I saw a post that Drew Shelton was a lock for the 53 rather than the practice squad or bubble. I agree with that. I do think he's a 100% lock. I don't think there's, barring him really underperforming, I would be shocked if he didn't make the final 53. I'm intrigued by him. If he gets stronger, as I believe he will, he could be a great pass protector and a competent run blocker. Shelton allowed just 1 sack in his final year at Penn State over 350 snaps. He is technically sound, athletic, and reliable. And coming into the NFL as a rookie, Drew Shelton has a lot less to work on to improve than Tyler Guyton did as a first-round pick, which is also why I'm high on him. Tyler Guyton was a high-ceiling, low-floor mechanical project who was incredibly raw in his technique. Drew Shelton, by contrast, entered the league as a strength project with a much higher conceptual and technical floor. Exactly what I said. Yeah, I agree with you 100%. Cowboys 8822 says, "Do you have insider news that it's not going to happen? Just because you say it, just because you say it's not, don't mean it won't or can't happen." Talking about the trade, I'm assuming from yesterday. No, I don't. I'm not an insider. If I ever gave that vibe or that feeling, I am not. It's one of the reasons why I have the actual reporters, and I have their images on screen or their posts on screen, their writing on screen, and I shout out them because they're the insiders. They have the scoop. What I am doing is making a prediction, and this is one of the things I was given this advice a long time ago, and I think it's great advice. Make predictions. Because, and don't make them willy-nilly. Have an actual thought process that you follow to make a prediction in all walks of life. But make predictions and then see what happens. See if they come true or not. And then reevaluate what you got right, what you got wrong. And then retailor your personal model for life, or in this case for the Dallas Cowboys, based on the results of that prediction. Because otherwise you're just an observer through life, right? There's a saying a lot of people use on the internet these days, an NPC, which in video game shorthand is a non-playable character, right? It's someone where if you play a video game, it's someone that you don't control, you don't interact with. He's just kind of a guy that's just there. And a lot of people in life, unfortunately, are NPCs. They're just there. They just are just watching, and they're kind of just going through life and going through the motions, not really being, really involved. I think making predictions, having takes, and having thoughtful takes, right? Just don't say things willy-nilly just because, but having thoughtful takes and then evaluating whether you got them right or wrong is a great way to be engaged and a great way to grow mentally. That's advice I got, and I stick to it to this day. So I make predictions all the time. I'm wrong a lot of the time, and I try to evaluate why I got wrong so I can be more correct in the future. But do I have any inside scoop? Absolutely not. I'm just making a prediction based on what I know and what I've observed. And if I'm wrong, I'll recalibrate. Anchors Away 9893 says, mentioned it a few days ago, but I believe the Cowboys O-line will definitely be top 5 this year. Pretty confident on that. Well, listen, I think they're probably going to be the best guard duo in the NFL, would be my guess. BB's a very good center. Terrence Steele, great run blocker, good leader, mediocre pass protector. A lot of it hinges on the left tackle. If Guyton is healthy and lives up to his talent, I agree with you 100%, but that's where things really hinge on. Jerry Jones most likely is not making any moves. I agree about it, less than 1%. I would bet on keeping Bland versus trading him. To me, that's where it hinges on Revel. I think there's a decent chance they trade Deron Bland if Revel is playing really good football and they don't have injuries or things like that. And of course, if someone's willing to give up something substantial for Deron Bland, that too. Nobody finds more diamonds in the rough than the Cowboys. I feel like we always get a quality player in later rounds and undrafted free agents. Jerry can find players. He knows ball. He just likes screwing up contracts, although as of late, he seems to be doing much better. Other front office inputs. I think there's a lot of things. I talked about this a little bit earlier, but where Jerry Jones, one of his big flaws is that he didn't leverage the investments he made in the Cowboys organization by being all just internal draft and develop and sign guys. Get Dallas Cowboys. Now, for the business model, that makes a lot of sense. You draft a guy, he becomes a star, fans love him, you sign him to a long-term deal, drives up jersey sales, all that kind of stuff. So from a business side, it makes sense. But from a football side, it would make more sense to bring in some outside guys to say, look how great the Cowboys are, spread the word because of how much I invest in the Cowboys. Compare that to the Bengals or the Browns or the Eagles or the Packers or the Jaguars or whoever, right? Washington Cowboys invest a lot in the organization. And everyone who comes here, I remember Logan Wilson. Logan Wilson's wife had an interview late last season where he was like, she was like, this is like the most pro-family I can ever imagine. Like they roll out everything. And this is Logan Wilson's wife saying, for us and the kids, like this is unbelievable. I can't even imagine this. They, just everything and more for the families here. And that's just one part of what the Cowboys do. I think Jerry Jones not leveraging that was a big mistake on the football side. And this is where I think Brian Schottenheimer becoming, as I've described him, the de facto GM has become really important because it's allowed Jerry Jones to take a step back and be the chairman of the board. And I think that's where he's at his best. He's really, really good as the CEO, chairman of the board, high-level decision, and a great salesman, right? Gets a lot of eyeballs on him. But I think in the nitty-gritty, I think that's where he's run into some issues. You need to have senior veteran leadership in any organization. NFL is crucial if you're looking to make a serious championship run. I would argue Dak is more valuable in this aspect than being the quarterback. Dak just needs to play lights out in the playoffs to secure a spot in Canton. Yeah, this is a really important point, right? You need grown-ups. If you look at quarterbacks that win championships and make deep playoff runs, it's almost exclusively grown-ups. Even if they're younger quarterbacks, it's guys that are mature beyond their years, right? Patrick Mahomes, right? Obviously, very mature, grown-up quarterback, checks all the boxes off the field, right? Tom Brady, of course, checks all the boxes. Peyton Manning, Drew Brees, heck, even Jalen Hurts, as much as it pains me to admit it, guy's a grown-up. He's 26 going on 46. Right, Sam Darnold, even last year for the Seattle Seahawks, the guy who's been through some bumps and bruises. He's a grown-up. For all his flaws as a quarterback at different points in his career, he's always been mature. He's always been, checking all the right boxes. If you want to win in the NFL, if you want to win in business, you need grown-ups and senior leadership. And again, I agree with you. That's what Dak is. He just needs to, when he gets those opportunities in the playoffs, like you said, step up and take advantage of them. All right, next comment here is from Rick Collins. He says, I honestly believe Guyton was a wasted pick. I say give the rookie a chance. He may not be ready for the big time yet, but what other options do we have? This is going to be a major concern for Dallas as the season continues, especially when you're talking about Dak's blind side. Maybe TJ Bass can help out if absolutely needed. Well, I think Drew Shelton, obviously if he earns it, I think he earns it, right? Set up a competitive atmosphere, but I wouldn't call Guyton a wasted pick yet, right? Let's see what he does. This is a big year for him. And I'm very critical of Guyton. I'm very honest and upfront about that. But I will say this, right? Sometimes we can be very short-sighted as fans. I can be this way personally. Like, it takes time to develop to become an NFL player, right? We all forget. Look at Aikman's career. Look at Staubach's. Did they walk out after year 2 and become superstars? Was anyone calling Troy Aikman a wasted pick after 1990 or Staubach after 1970? If they did, and they said the Cowboys need to move on and just bench them, missed out on some really great performances, right? So sometimes we need players to have time to develop. But year 3 to me is generally the cutoff. I was looking at Mozzie Smith when the Cowboys drafted Mozzie Smith, and I said, okay, it's going to take some time. We'll see how everything shakes out. And I think clearly by year 3, it was inherently obvious he was not working out at all. But I think you give every player at least 3 years, because sometimes it takes guys time, especially a guy like Guyton, who was literally drafted as a developmental prospect. Jeepers says, if I was to think about a position I'm most concerned about, it would be left tackle. It's critical to have consistent, competent play from left tackle. If Guyton falls short, Dak is going to feel the pain. At this point, I'm not inclined to think that either Thomas or Shelton can perform at a high level as a starter. I hope I'm wrong. Here's where things get interesting. Traditionally, I agree with that. But Clayton Adams' offense puts a lot of stress on guards. So what they will do is, in a lot of their play action concepts, the tackles actually aren't going to be blocking defensive ends by themselves. Right? What they will do is they'll have the tackle with usually a fullback or tight end help on one side, and on the other side, they'll have the play side tackle block down and take the inside gap, and they'll pull the guard like it's a play action, it's a faking the running play to go get that defensive end. So that puts Tyler Smith in an awful situation, and he does great in those awful situations, but it lessens the load on those tackles. So the Cowboys did that a lot last season, and that's part of Clayton Adams' offense. Now, they don't do that every pass play, of course. It's only a few of them. But being not great pass protecting at left or right tackle doesn't doom the Cowboys' offense just by the structure of their scheme, and also because their guards are really good, which Clayton Adams uses a lot to his advantage. But I do agree with you. You got to get it right. You got to be better there for sure. Sonny Mimi says the Drew Shelton name drop is what I believe was a red herring to put Guyton and Thomas on notice to get their stuff together, tighten the screws a couple more turns. Certainly could be, right? Certainly could be. We are all concerned about the left tackle position, but what about right tackle? Everyone believes Steele's play is abysmal, but is it one pressure every 20.7 plays is horrible, right? That is 3 pressures per game last season. Or is it serviceable until the heir apparent appears, traded for, or drafted, who assumes the backup this season? If teams start taking the Duke Manyweather's opinion that the swing tackle position is the wrong approach, that would mean every team would need a competent backup at both right tackle and left tackle as standalone players. It's an interesting point. Terrence Steele is a good leader, good run blocker. He is a mediocre pass protector. But is he a disaster at pass protection? No, not at all. But I think they'd like to be better there. I think the issue with Steele in a lot of ways was how much he was being compensated. He took a pay cut that obviously lessens the load a little bit in terms of the expectations on him. But there are some questions there long term when it comes to pass protecting. That I think is undeniable. But I do think Steele is at least stable, right? He's at least overall a competent offensive tackle. Guyton, I think, has had injuries, right? We don't know if he can be healthy and available for a whole season. Steele, we know he's played dozens of dozens of starts at this point. He's been a starter since 2020 as an undrafted free agent, right? So he's been playing a lot of football. We know Steele, say what you want about Terrence Steele, he's reliable for the most part. Guyton, not so much. Thomas, not so much. Shelton, obviously, being a rookie. So we're looking for reliability and consistency and stability at left tackle. I think that's why there's a lot of attention there. Jerry's statement struck me more of we have had conversations all the way through yesterday when I spoke to another owner, and we are always looking. I took that to mean the talk was more to gauge interest and versus availability, but we are all aware that Jerry loves the firestorm one of his off-the-cuff statements brings. Yeah, I think you're 100% correct. I talked about this yesterday. To me, that was 100% trying to drive up attention, get people excited, get people engaged. I do not think the Cowboys are making a major deal, right? And right away it worked when one of the first questions, I forget who asked it, was, what about Max Crosby, right? And how many podcasters, content creators, YouTubers, social media people yesterday, you guys can answer in the comment section below, made videos or wrote articles about the Cowboys trading for Max Crosby. Blew up my timeline. Are the Cowboys trading for Max Crosby? Probably not even close. I would say the odds are, again, less than 1%. But it got people talking, which is what Jerry Jones wants. All right, guys, that's the comments for today, and that is the show for today. Training camp practice number 2 coming at you later today. Exciting times with the Dallas Cowboys. Caleb Downs, already a starter. It's what we expected, but he's being used in a way that I think is very smart, which is also what we expected from Christian Parker. So far as advertised, going to keep an eye on other new additions, other rookies making some plays. Left tackle, definitely a position to watch. Malachi Lawrence, corner as well. Linebacker too. A lot of positions, a lot of buzz, a lot of excitement, a lot of great things happening now that football is finally back. And I will be here every single day breaking down the latest stuff with you guys, starting, of course, tomorrow morning. But until then, I'm Nick, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection.